So Drew, last time when you were at the Project Control Conference and you presented at the Project Control Conference, I think both of us talking together, we coined a term called the human dimension.
Yeah, the HD.
The HD.
In the BIM modeling world of, Ds.
And all the different Ds you had.
And then what I call it, the twilight zone of construction is the
That's
HD.
it. The twilight zone?
Yeah,
is the HD?
Yeah, well, you can put in all the data you want, right?
Yeah.
2D, 3D, 4D, 10D, like everything. Like you can put in all the data. It's great. It's going to give you a lot more accuracy. But then you spit out that plan and give it to a bunch of humans.
Yep.
And now into
the only people that can make decisions and influence positive change on a job site.
That's right. But then
Human
you give
beings.
it to the humans, which is the twilight zone, because that project plan goes into that group of people.
Yeah.
And as you know, because you're a bit of an expert in this, how many projects don't end up having extensions of times and delays, and I know there's weather ones. I know there's ones that are weather, but how many other human dimension is actually the issue?
A lot of them.
Yeah, and most of them have that,
Yeah.
right? I'm not saying you get away from it, but it's very hard to model the human factor.
Yeah. But how much of an influence do you reckon that human dimension has in the tendering process of a project? And second part to that question, the rise and the downfall of a project.
Yeah.
Do you think is controlled by the human dimension?
Well, you're probably asking the wrong person because I'm not a technical guy, but I would safely assert that it's pretty much obviously you need to get the sort of data or the right data and make a good plan, but I think it all comes down to the human side of it. And in the actual tendering process, we've talked about this a lot, you have all sorts of different personalities, which we'll talk about later. Some are super analytical, some are like blue sky, big picture, like it'll be sweet, don't worry. So they'll almost undercook it because they're not actually drilling down to the details. Some are just worried about all the relationships. So, you put in that mix of people and with different motives. And if there's not the right checks and balances in that tendering process, we've seen it a lot. Like 100%. People will try and get the tender through just to win the job.
Yep.
And then the burden falls on, the construction company or, certain people who are now just...
Most of the people delivering the job on site.
Yeah, the project managers, the project directors, all the way up to the GM as well, right, of companies that I've worked with where they're now under massive amounts of stress because the tendering process wasn't done well.
Yeah.
And, I know you're working on some really cool stuff with AI and everything with the tendering process, but at the end of the day, you're still going to have some humans who are part of it. And if there's not a lot of accurate work done and understanding of the dynamics of who's working on those tenders, then you're going to get so much bias and just so much in there that isn't going to lead to a project getting done properly. So, and that's just the tendering process.
Right? 100%. It's just a process. For the benefit of everybody who's listening, let's dig into what your definition of a human dimension actually is. And now I'm asking the right question?
It's fine. You can ask me any question. You know me.
No.
So the way I look at it, and this is what I was talking about at the Project Controls Conference, is most of us would see the human dimension, if we're going to coin that HD, which I like the fact that we're coining that. You heard it here first, by the way. Actually, at the Project Controls Conference
That's
first.
a second. You had your second.
HD, exactly. And then everyone started saying it at the conference. It was cool. But we look at data points, right? Like what are some data points you have to put into a tender?
Key performance measures as to what defines success for a project, start-finish dates, key milestones. There's a whole bunch. Yeah.
But weather factor data, the different materials you got to use, so there's all
procurement lead times.
Yeah, you got to pull that data in. And often I think it's looked at as how would you model for this human dimension, because it just seems like humans are so unpredictable.
I can tell you what they do now.
More unpredictable than the weather. What do they do?
Literally pull up an org chart to the side and say, which project director is available? Oh, yeah, he's got 20% capacity. Put his name down there. Oh, he has a good CV. Put him down there.
That's right.
Yeah,
and you might get lucky.
And which PM, but doesn't necessarily mean who's put forward in the tender is actually going to do the job.
That's right. And often, even if the people put forward in the tender for the super team actually do the job, I don't know if there's enough work done to go,
are they the right team?
And how are they all going to actually work together? Yeah. What are their different styles, everything? But more to the point is, I don't think people see the human dimension as a set of data points. So the last 20 odd years of working with people and the process I do, you know what it's like. Remember, you almost fired me because you were a bit confronted about the deep unpacking work that I was doing, which we'll talk about later.
Day two, I was ready to
say. You were like, you bring up that shit from my past.
Drew, I don't think it's going to work.
And then I'll remind you of my contract, which says, trust the process. You signed, right? But when you've talked to that many human beings, sometimes people say to me, oh, do you have a master's in psychology or whatever? And I have a degree, but it's an applied science degree. But I spent so many years and so many thousands of hours listening to every version of human suffering and problems and issues and everything like that. In my process now, it's not the same for everybody, but it just gets to the point where I will collect a whole lot of information about your life, about your environment, about your wife and your kids and your parents and just everything, right? What's his name from school?
Let's call him RJ for now. Right?
That's right? Like even people like that, but people who are influential in your environment. But over time, it's just another set of data points.
Yeah.
And you've seen me do it. I put it all up on the wall sort of and map it out.
I have, yeah.
And I can pretty much go, well, if this happens, Andy, and this happens, you're going to behave like this.
Yep. And these are your trigger points.
And it's pretty, and this will trigger you. And when you, like you do now, have learned to sort of master that aspect of self, the inputs come in and you can go, oh, I know this feeling, I know this reaction. So
and calm down, process it.
That's right.
Where am I sitting in the transaction cycle?
Exactly.
To then map out how I'm going to move forward rather than react.
That's right. We always say transact, reciprocally, holistically, and think about it. But last thing to say to wrap this bit up is that I personally think it's possible you could do a pretty good job of modeling into the tenders all the data, so to speak, about the actual humans. You could use personality profiles, you do all sorts of stuff, but I don't think it would be horribly difficult. You need a bit of skills, but I think, you could do a lot better job of the tendering and then the execution of the tender.
Can I just add one point to that, though? So we've got a problem with the way we procure projects in New Zealand. And it starts right from the government. Really?
I haven't seen any of those. Yeah,
it's fucked. It's brutally honest. It's fucked, right? So there's so much emphasis given to the cost aspect of tendering.
That's right.
Yeah, where your non-price attributes are just going, oh, it's your second cousin that nobody actually remembers or nobody cares about.
That's right.
Whereas, that's actually a lot more important. And
I think you almost need to flip it.
100%, because that's what feeds the cost.
Yeah.
Your health and safety, your program, your timelines, your environmental management plans, your human management, your resource management, all of that was what feeds the cost.
That's right.
Because you extend the time by a week on site. I mean, that cost doesn't mean jack shit. The budget you set doesn't mean jack shit. You've already blown your budget.
Yeah.
So how do we get the industry to actually flip that or understand the importance of all of these non-price attributes? What you do, what I do. It's just not dollars that matter. That's one aspect of it.
It's obviously a very complex thing to consider, but there's, just thinking about it, I think if there was a willingness for those who have experienced the consequence of major extensions of time or issues between...
Hang on, that's every project in New Zealand.
I understand, but issues between... Well, I think there's this is just the kind of cost of doing business.
No, it is understood as just...
which is, what do they call it? The fat? No, they call it that, there's the actual word for it in construction where you have your
contingency.
Buffer. Yeah, for like how much fat you've got to blow the project out and everything like that. Yeah. But...
That's a funny... If we start talking about that, we'll go on forever, but I'll stop there.
But just I think if I don't know if people, say in the industry, who've experienced the cost of having to go back and, correct things and do things differently and, go through, because I've seen you do it, the extension of time, process where the project managers, love them and hate them. They're like, nah, we'll do everything we can to not have to say yes to your extension of time, Mr. Mr. and Mrs. Construction Company, because, we're acting for the client. So, and so you get in this like, well, this is what you said. Here's the tender. Here's the plan. So, WTF. And I just think there needs to be more reciprocal sort of collaborative work where it's not us and them. And I think personally more, I'm probably speaking through sort of a very inexperienced lens, but like on the outside looking in, like more collaboration in the process. there just seems to be
doesn't
many
exist,
fractured. Yeah, there just means so many.
Doesn't
But it
exist.
doesn't make sense to me because I'll often say to business owners that I'm working with, look, if you don't slow down in the process of, before you contract for stuff, you might get your sale done fast and you can measure how quickly you get the sale done, for example. But can you measure, once you're in the actual activity and the fulfillment of what you've sold, do you actually measure the breakdown and the cost of lack of productivity and having to go backwards constantly when, I didn't know it was this and you said this, but now you're not delivering that. Like if people slow down more in that process and they're not just trying to get it across the line to get the costs and get the deal done, and I don't just mean on the people putting the tender in, I think it goes both ways.
It
I
does.
think
Okay,
there's
so
pressure from, we need you to get this tender and we need you to do it at the lowest cost, so that everyone gets sucked up into that
one mind frame.
that world, right? And
Yeah.
so then everyone's doing that.
But here's the thing, though, right? You keep coming about meeting of the minds and getting a fair contract where you go sit down and actually articulate the intent of the contract to the
Yeah,
other person,
that's
which
right.
never happens in construction, by the way. You just throw a piece of paper to on the other side through
Yeah,
emails.
send me your terms and we'll get started.
But here's the reason why, because there's a standard contract in place called
I
NZ3910.
know all about that.
You know all about that, I'm sure.
Yeah,
you know?
I sat on the what's it, the
Accords?
Yeah, so on
the
the
Accords
Accords,
is normal,
just
by the
after-
way.
oh, it's not.
They've dissolved the Accords. Oh, something like that. The Accords, it's going to be called something like that. I don't know, mate.
Yeah, but I listened to the changes that
Yeah.
made and all the people just going,
What's going on?
this is not really many changes at all. I
No.
mean, they've attempted to make a difference. But yeah,
Yeah,
that contract's really difficult.
And it's taken 4 years to make minor changes to that contract, which is a criminal waste of time. As in my opinion, it's a criminal waste of time. Whereas you look overseas and you can find much better collaborative contracts. Yeah, it may be more onerous to administer the contract, like the NEC contracts. Yeah, 100%. Do we have to upskill? Absolutely. Right? But there are more collaborative contracts which require more administration, which actually hold parties accountable to do things. But somehow there's no willingness in New Zealand to actually adopt an NEC contract, which I find really, really weird.
Yeah, and I don't know why that is. I haven't been around
Yeah.
long enough to understand
And
that.
that then in my mind flows back into, the meeting of the minds.
That's right.
I think we've got to get that step right first before we move on to meeting of the minds, where you go, right, the intent of the contract is X, Y, and Z.
Yeah.
And we're going to use this to administer the contract. Because, I had another guest who said, if I have to pull a contract out of my desk, mate, I'm in fucking trouble.
Well, the other thing is, and I've asked this to some of my lawyer buddies, often when you're getting into that contractual sort of negotiation, as far as once the contract's done and you're going back to the contract going, well, it says this and it says this, they'll often back the whole thing up to what was the spirit of the intent of all the conversations that happened prior to the signing of contract anyway. So sometimes all that gobbledygook and details in the contract, which is obviously there for risk and security and legalities, but often in court they will go, well, let's go all the way back to what did you actually
intent.
say to each other and the spirit of what was said, because it's very hard to get written down perfectly into contracts everything that actually is intimated and said and discussed and all of that. And so I think if people spend more time in that pre-contract kind of phase, as we said, we could do this and we could do that, and hey, but what if this, and it will look like this, and I've done this myself and I've trained people on this, and I tell you, when people slow down and they spend a lot more time in that like really getting that meeting of the minds about what we're all going to intend to do, and if this, then that, and will you have room for that, and all of that. Then when you get
it will
to
be real simple though. How do you manage change? How do you manage risk? Who's accountable for what parts of change? What's included in the budget? What's not included in the budget? It ain't rocket science.
Well, I mean, you can tell me this, but it sounds like there are, because it's such a, that industry's been around forever, since the beginning, really, of building stuff.
Since the pyramids.
Yeah, that's right, exactly. Or before, right? If you,
Or before.
get into some of the more recent, what do you call it, studies and everything like that. But it sounds like there's a lot of assumptions. And this might sound like a weird thing to say, but when you're in an intimate relationship, you often forget that even though you know them well and you think you might know what's best for them and what they might like, skipping the part where you go, hey, I'd like to have a conversation with you to talk about X. And they're like, yeah, sure. And you go, well, what I was thinking was, and you actually have a proper sort of talking about what you want to talk about and why and all of this, that intent part. Often we'll just go straight to, I've done this. I've already pretty much committed to it, and I'm, assuming that that's what you would do, and you like it, and you get up in a big argument with your other half because you skipped like a couple of steps in the process of properly taking them on a journey and having a dialogue and having a conversation.
Yeah.
And it's easy to do because they're so familiar. You think you know them, and sometimes you're right if you just skip straight to the commitment part of what we're going to do, and I've already decided, already booked it, or whatever it might be. And similar in larger scale sorts of things. If you assume just because we've done this a million times that we don't have to constantly slow down and make sure we're on the same page and make sure we've got a meeting of the minds, things always go a lot better in the long run.
Yeah.
But humans just want to get to the work. They want to get to the commitment, want to get the deal done. It's our natural thing, and we just don't want to
make progress.
Have that time, and especially in the construction world with engineers who aren't necessarily great communicators or talkers, as far as they don't like hanging out there. Just we've got the data, we know the results that need to happen. Let's just kind of get to work,
and then bullshit.
And then you're just constantly, sort of spinning around and around and around with issues and problems and breakdowns of communication. And the number of times I just get pulled into stuff where the reason things have slowed down or not working or things are behind is just purely communication lines.
Absolutely.
And the reason there's breakdowns of communication lines because there was nothing established at the very beginning of how are we going to dialogue and talk and resolve things. And, it's you've got to establish all that stuff.
Yeah, 100%. So just summarizing all of that, the human dimension, right? The human dimension, part of the whole tendering process, could be really valuable if you start collecting data points.
Yeah.
And start incorporating that as part of the non-price attributes.
Yeah, well, if you've got project teams that go from project to project, which I know happens.
Yep.
These people.
Everybody's personalities. Yeah,
you know
100%.
how they behave. They struggle if they work too many. You just know all the trigger points and all the different things.
Yeah, 100%.
You can factor that into a project plan. I mean, it's no different than a whole lot of other data points that you're already putting in there. That's just might be naive, might be just people.
No, you're not naive at all.
People going, you're just crazy. You never do that. Well,
mate, it makes so much
I'm
sense.
I'm currently starting to do it and starting to see the benefits of it. So I do think it's possible.
Yeah. All right, mate. Thanks for those really cool views.